East and West Learning Connections
helps people of different cultures break barriers and connect with each other.
Together, let's make learning and connections happen.
Together, we make cross-cultural learning and connections happen.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And firstly, let me thank Young for all the incredible work she does through East and West Learning. And without her, none of this would be possible. So I think we're all very, very grateful for the amount of energy and time she puts into this organization and the outreach that she does to arrange these sessions, which are invaluable to many and hopefully will be again tonight. And of course, to Frank for hosting this and making sure that he's the one that keeps me in line to make sure that we stick to what we're going to do. And I really appreciate him moderating the sessions and also organizing all the questions as they come in. It's very appreciative, and I appreciate your time in doing that. So tonight, what I thought we would do, continuing much along the same vein as we've had in the past, is I would talk to you a little bit about being an entrepreneur and try to pass through to you a few nuggets. And by definition of nuggets, I mean valuable tools that I've learned over my close to now, embarrassingly enough to say, it's almost 50 years. It's 49 years. It'll be 50 years actually this coming summer. August 1st, 2025 will be the 50th anniversary of when I began my own business when I was 19 years old. So I've been at it for a long time. Hopefully I've learned one or two things. And this evening, I'll try and pass 2 or 3 of those things to you. And then we'll open it up for questions on any of those 3 things, plus anything else you want to ask about entrepreneurship. So to start out with, and it's interesting that, we didn't cover this last time, which was really, I guess, our first formal part of this series. We had a couple of entrepreneurship lectures before this, but when we decided to make this on a quarterly basis, this is the second one. And one of the areas that I probably was remiss in not covering, but would like to cover tonight, just for those who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, but aren't necessarily sure about what that means and how to go about it. So in other words, how do you set your business up? So I'm going to go through it fairly quickly because to some of you, this will be very repetitive in the fact that you already have done this or you know how to do it. But for those of you who are with us tonight or joining us tonight that haven't set their own business up, but may be interested in setting their own business up, I'll go over this fairly quickly just to tell you a really quick way of getting started. So one of the first things you need to do is think about, once you have your idea, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Once you have your idea, obviously you have to do 2 things. You have to set up a domain and you want to register your business. So it's quite simple to do all of that. For those of you who don't know, to register a domain, you can simply go to somewhere like GoDaddy. You can go to, there's a variety of different places you go. You go to WordPress. So there's a variety of different places to go and search domains. It doesn't cost you anything to do a search on the domains. Just some advice in picking a domain. In general terms, it's always best to pick a .com. First of all, it's the largest and most general listing. Secondly, if you do start working on SEO, which is search engine optimization, usually the performance of that is much greater on a .com than it would be to try and find you, let's say, on a .ca or any of the other extensions. So the focus would be is try to find a .com, try to find one that's, a name that is fairly inexpensive, and they can go, typically you'll see deals out there where you pay 1 cent for the first year and $20 for the year 2 and $20 for year 3. But usually you can find a domain for anywhere from $20 to $30 a year. It may not be your ideal choice, but it could be a good choice to get started with. That's the first thing. Second thing to do is to then go and register it as a business. In order to do that, you'd go onto the web, you'd look up setting up a corporation in Ontario, Canada. It will come up, and there's 2 things that can happen. Number one, it's very easy to set up in your own. I think it's around $300 or $400 for a provincial corporation, and it's about around $200, something like that, for a federal corporation. I would advise you probably to pick a provincial organization, unless you're really planning on opening offices in places other than Toronto. I would suggest to you that you pick an Ontario. First of all, it will make the search for the name a little bit easier and a little bit more general. There'll be more acceptance if you just search Ontario than across Canada. And if you're really only operating or going to be operating out of Ontario, it's best just to choose an Ontario corporation. So you would do what's called a nuance search. That's Nuance, a nuance search. And the nuance search, just like the domain search, will tell you whether your name that you choose for your business is available for the purposes that you want it for. Once you've done your nuance search, you can go ahead and register it. And all told, I think it's about $300, something like that, maybe $320 or something like that, to register your business. And actually, you're now set up as a corporation. If you're in doubt, there are people that when you go and search for an Ontario corporation, you'll see that there are people that for a fee of $100 or $200 or $300 will help you set up your own corporation, but you don't have to spend that $100 or $200 if you feel that you can do it on your own. So that's a little bit about setting up your business, setting up a domain, and once you have your corporation and once you have your domain, you're ready to go. So now the next thing is looking at setting up a website. And what was very, very complex and very, very expensive when I used to set up businesses back in the 90s and the 2000s has become very, very inexpensive. And your ability to actually start a business, set up a website, set up a domain today is actually very, very inexpensive if you do it the right way. So in setting up a website, in general, there's two different ways to do that. You can set up you can go out and get somebody to do a website for you who actually does physical coding, and they can make everything original, and they can make it exactly the website that that you dream it to be. They can put in all the coding, etc. However, if you go down this road, you may end up with a website that eventually is exactly what you want, but there's two major pitfalls. First of all, it's very expensive. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars doing it. And secondly, because it's set up by an individual who's doing coding, almost inevitably, you're going to find a whole lot of problems all the time with dead ends where people have dead links and that kind of thing. It will take you forever to really get that website up where effectively there's no problems with it. So it's not highly recommended, but you should know at least it's an option. But the best way to set up a website is through a SaaS platform, which is a software as a service platform, similar to what you've heard, I'm sure you're all familiar with, Shopify or WordPress, and there's several others. GoDaddy has it as well. So there's several other platforms that are SaaS-based platforms where effectively you don't have to do any of the coding. It's all done for you. And basically, it's just sort of a plug and play. You go and pick what you want. You go and pick your colors. You go and pick the fonts. You go and pick where you want things. You go and put your products up. And it turns out to be a relatively easy thing to do. Again, you don't have to know any coding. Some of the ones that are very easy, as an example, are SaaS products, are things like Shopify. The problem with Shopify or Etsy is another one, is that they make it very easy for you to set up the website, but then on a transaction basis, they tend to take a lot of money, where it could cost you as much as 5 or 10 or 15% of every transaction. So although it's very easy to set up, you pay for it for the rest of your business because it's very expensive in terms of what they deduct from your product. An easier way to do it would be to set up through something like WordPress, which is an excellent platform. In fact, it powers some of the largest companies in the world. And WordPress has much more variables to it. So in other words, it's a little bit more difficult, no coding, but there's a lot more options and you have to do a lot more work to set it up. But the good news is once you set it up, then you can just basically put in what's called APIs or plugins. And you can just choose, as an example, if you want e-commerce, you can just use the plugin Square or Stripe. And all you got to do is you click on it, sign up for it, and boom, you're in business. You now can take all these credit cards. They take only about 3% of each transaction as opposed to 10 or 15. And you're all set up. In addition to that, it'll also set up for Canada Post, USPS in the States, or any of the other shipping companies. And the best news of that is once you have the API set up with it, is that the Canada Post, as an example, when a person checks out on your site, because it's linked directly into Canada Post, it will actually charge the customer the exact amount of money that they have to pay you for sending it by Canada Post. Then what happens is when you actually send the product, you go into the site to send the product, go into Canada Post to send the product, and you'll actually get a slight discount from Canada Post because you're a merchant. And so you'll actually make a couple of dollars or something like that on each shipment that you make. So it looks after charging your customer. You then go and pay them. All of this is on automatic cruise control. In other words, it's all set up for you. It's very easy to do. And in fact, the cost of the cost of the website, the cost of the hosting for the year can be as minimal as $5 a month if you just kind of want a private public site that doesn't do all that much. And you can pay up to probably about $60 or $70 a month through WordPress, where it will give you a full commerce platform with all these APIs that you can hook into for shipping and for e-commerce, etc. So if you think about it, you go through this for probably including your domain, your business, all of this setup, you could probably be in business with a fully functional website that does shipping, does everything else, probably for well under $100 a month. And if you're going into a small business, even in a small business, that's not a lot of money to invest. Whereas I can tell you 20 years ago, it would have been in the tens of thousands of dollars. So now that we've got all that set up, here's some of the other things that we need to look at in setting up our business. And this is just the foundation of creating a business. The categories you need to look at are production, marketing, sales, administration, finance, accounting, and most importantly, scalability. And I'll touch on that in a moment. So from a production perspective, you got to think about how you're going to make your product. If it's simply a service that you're providing, if you are a technology company, it's all about software. And you've already thought about, what's it going to take to set up the software? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to update it? Who's going to be there if there's a problem? So you have to think about all the things associated with running a technology company. Who's going to market? Who's going to do the marketing? If you're a services or sales company, or services or goods company, who's going to do the marketing? Are you going to go to a place like Google, use their tools, Amazon, or a variety of the other places? Are you going to use influencers and go to your networks and use social media in a way in which to go out to your friends and then ask your friends to go to their friends? These are some of the very, very simple ways and very inexpensive ways of really getting your product launched. And that, again, to repeat, is you simply go to all your friends, ask them to post, your website address, a little bit about, telling them a little bit about the product. Hey, I just saw this great new product. It's fantastic. A friend of mine is doing this. You got to go visit, their website. That's the first step. And the second step is you would then ask those same people who are what we call your friendlies. We'd go and ask them to ask their friends to do the same thing for you and go out to all their friends. And again, it just grows exponentially. That's the fastest and easiest way to actually get your sales going and start to produce products. So that's on the marketing side. On the sales side, obviously, you're going to do whatever you can through word of mouth, phone call, and any other possible way that you can think of from a sales perspective to both sell and market your product. Then you have to have some strong administration. And by the way, in the very beginning days, when I first started, when I was 19 years old, I was production, marketing, sales, administration, finance, accounting, chief bottle washer, and everything else in between. I was it. So as you begin to take on people, you'll start to think about what are your strengths. If your strengths are marketing and sales, then you're going to have to find somebody who's very good at it in administration, finance, accounting, etc. So you got to think about what your strengths are and then fill it in with somebody who has strengths in the other areas that you don't. Finally, one of the last things that I get asked a lot about is this topic of scalability. How do you scale your product? Because what tends to happen in most small businesses when you start out is you end up with a balancing act. And what do I mean by a balancing act? Well, if you go out there and get millions of dollars in sales, but you can't produce the product, you're going to upset a whole host of people. And you're going to close down your business very quickly because you can't deliver. On the other hand, if you go out there and focus all your energy on production and you have thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of dollars of product, but you have no sales, you're also going to be out of business pretty quickly. So this management of revenue versus production all has to do with the word scalability. So whatever product or service or technology you choose to sell, you have to think about scalability. In other words, we start out in a way in which we start to sell and start to produce product, both in somewhat of a small fashion. We don't want to overproduce, we don't want to oversell, but certainly we need the revenue and we need some product. You start to balance that. And the key thing is that if sales do start to take off, you need to have a product, service, or good that you know that you can scale. So just in case all of a sudden you're selling 10 units one day and you're selling 100 units the next, you have to be able to scale or have a plan at least to scale to do 100 and maybe 1,000 the next day. So you have to think about scalability. And if the business does take off, what are you going to do to keep up production to scale? So that's a little bit about setting up a business, the things that you need to think about. And these are more just practical things day to day. I'll probably never repeat this again unless I'm asked to. It's recorded. You can go back and listen to it. But if you're sitting here as a person thinking, I want to start a business, I really don't know where to go first, this is basically a step-by-step approach to starting a business, which could put you very quickly into a nice, small to even medium-sized business without a lot of expense and a very good methodology, step-by-step process of doing so. So now that we've touched on setting up a business, and Frank, I'm going to ask you at this point, would you like to take questions on each one of these three sections tonight, or would you like me to sort of provide the other two sections and then just hold questions to the end? What would be your preference, Frank?
I prefer ask on this topic now. Yeah. So
okay, good.
Yeah. So make it people not get sleeping. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So why don't we open it up now for any questions you have in terms of setting up a business or if you want to participate and you have some suggestions on things I didn't cover, feel free. I'm not the only expert on this call. I'm sure there's many others that are as well. So if you either want to add to what I've said and or ask questions, now's the time to do so. And then we'll save the last two fun things for the latter part of our hour together tonight. Are there any questions, comments?
Yeah, please unmute yourself if you question how to set it up, set a business up. Yeah.
All right, looks like everyone's going to have their business all set up tomorrow then.
Oh, no, sorry. I actually have a question.
Okay.
Martin, thank you so much. So regarding set up the website, because you just mentioned that there's a few approaches. One is this SaaS platform, and the other one is the WordPress. Once
Right.
you set up the API, it seems like my question, because you mentioned that of course the fee like SAS is pretty much more expensive later on when you sell the product, more expensive than the Work Express. But what is the advantage of the SAS over there compared to WordPress? Otherwise, like people will not even choose the SAS. What's the advantage of the choosing SAS then?
Okay, so just to be clear, the SaaS, which is the software as a service platform, which is a general term for people who where you more or less rent software from somebody and you layer on top of it your own graphics and your own ideas. Both WordPress and Shopify and others, GoDaddy as an example, are all SaaS platforms. So they all allow you to come on and create your own website. The alternative to using an SaaS platform is actually start working with a developer or a coder. Somebody will actually develop your website right from scratch. In other words, there's nothing set up. You just go to them and say, okay, you're a developer, you're a coder. I want to give you an idea of exactly what I'd like, and I want to set up my own website because I want it exactly the way I want it. Because when you go to an SaaS, the only downside of we refer to it as a SaaS product. The only downside of a SaaS product like WordPress or GoDaddy or Shopify is that it does have certain limitations. As an example, it may be that your header can only be a certain size. It could be that the fonts they may only offer 20 fonts, and you might want a different font than the 20 fonts they offer. It could be that the colors they offer in certain segments of the platform aren't necessarily your colors. So there will be some limitations because remember, this is a platform for everybody. But I can tell you now, these SaaS platforms have gotten to be there is so much open architecture on them that they really, really are very, very flexible, very flexible. To the point as I would not recommend going to a developer or a coder to do your own platform, because there's going to be the amount of errors that they're going to make and the amount of errors you're going to have to troubleshoot and the costs involved will be astronomical. So what I would say to almost everybody, in fact, I would say this with 100% certainty, is to choose a SaaS platform, a software as a service platform like WordPress or Shopify or GoDaddy. I happen to like WordPress. I think they're responsible for something like 50% of the websites on the internet are through WordPress now. And they actually host some of the largest, I was shocked, some of the largest companies in the world. You figure they would spend the money to get a developer and code their own, but they don't. They're actually using WordPress. And it gives you the ability to go in there. And again, the costs, just to run through this approximately, if you went to WordPress and set up your own website, the costs are anywhere from about $5 to $60 or $70 a month. Okay, that's it. That's what you're going to pay, $5 to $60 a month. So for that, you'll set up something either a little bit more elaborate or a little bit more simple, right? But once you make your choice between this $5 or $20 or $60 a month, once you've made that choice, you then can go in, set up your own website, make it look exactly like you want. It does incredible things. Like, as an example, if someone's in your shopping cart and they don't buy, right, it will automatically send them an email, and you can pick how long, 12 hours, 24 hours. You can pick that 12 hours after someone goes to a shopping cart but doesn't check out. Please send them an email to tell them they have products in their shopping cart they haven't checked out yet. So it does a whole host of things for you. And then the only other cost associated with the platform would be the actual transaction cost. And that's where within the platform, you would set up with Square or Stripe for e-commerce. And each time they process an order, let's say they process an order for $100, Square or Stripe would deduct $3 from the sale. So you would only get $97. So the customer would charge $100. You'd end up with 97. That 97 goes directly into your bank account. So when you set up with WordPress, you put in the bank accounts as to where that goes into. So the money goes directly into your bank account. They take their deductions usually right away, right when the sale's made, which is great. So when you get your $97, you keep it. And then your only other cost is at the end of the month, you have one cost of $50 or $60 or $20 just to maintain the website. Does that explain it to you, or were there questions about?
Oh, yes, very clear. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.
Were there any other questions from anybody else or any other comments?
Let me ask a quick question. I remember my daughter tried to sell some art, like T-shirts.
Yep.
Most, although not a lot, but some interested people from the US, the shipping has become problem. That's one that she was in high school in.
Yes.
Yeah. So the shipping costs more than what she could make. Yeah. Any suggestion on the cross-border shipping?
Okay. So here's the beauty. And Frank, thank you for asking that question. It's a brilliant question. Not so brilliant an answer, but a brilliant question. A really good one. So in fact, I just helped a very early stage company who's got their first, in fact, they just had their first 36 or 37 sales last week. They just started out and they had 37 sales, right? They've already done about $4,000 in the first week. So they're doing very well. And they had exactly that same problem. So here's what I advise and suggest you to do. Cross-border shipping is always ill-advised. And the reason it's ill-advised is because very often what happens is that the product will go through the border. 9 out of 10 packages will go through just perfectly fine. But it's the 10th package you got to worry about. All of a sudden, custom grabs it, and then they hold it, and the person doesn't receive it, and then they go back to that person and say, hey, by the way, there's duty there's a duty, and often the cost of duty is more than the cost of the product. So it gets to the point where everybody throws up their hands and says, just forget it, we'll send another one, right? So the best way is not to do cross-border shipping for a variety of reasons. But the most important reason I can say to you is simply it's going through the border and anything can happen. The best way to do this is, and if you go to WordPress as an example, or use WordPress, WordPress allows you to set up all currencies and all shipping agencies. So as an example, you can set up and have it so that anybody in the US orders in US funds and it's shipped by USPS, which is the United States Postal Service. You can have it so that anybody orders in Canada orders in Canadian funds and it's shipped by Canada Post. So no product ever goes through the border. Now the trick there, Frank, I know your next question is going to be is, yes, you do have to have product in the United States and you have to be able to ship it from there. So if your plan is to be in business in the United States, you are by far better off having somebody there who can ship the product through USPS or UPS or FedEx, any one of those suppliers from the US. So what it requires, as an example, is that your daughter may have been just well advised at that time to say, hey, do you have a friend or family or anybody in the US where you can send them or take them or ship them, 20 of the units, give them 20, or next time they're up here, let them take 20 of them home so that they have inventory there. And then anytime you get an order, you can have it such that the order goes directly to them. They produce the shipping label, walk it over to the UPS office, send it through, and it goes directly to the customer. Collection is in US dollars, payments in US dollars. And that's the other thing is you can also set up, which I'm doing for this company, is we're going to set up a US dollar account for them. The US dollar account can be set up in Canada, or you can set up a US dollar account, obviously, in the US. So you set up a US dollar account, you set up a Canadian dollar account, and keep everything US in the US, including shipping, keep everything in Canada, including the shipping. The other thing that WordPress can do, as an example, is you can choose the exchange rate. So if you choose to sell something for $10 in Canada and you want to sell it for $10 in the US, you can set up the exchange rate to be 0 so that a US customer will pay $10 US and a Canadian customer will pay $10 Canadian. If you want the exchange rate to be 1.39 because that's the current exchange rate, you can just set it up as 1.39. Therefore, if the product's $10 in the United States, it'll be $13.90 in Canada. You could also set it up so that anybody outside of North America will automatically convert their currency to Canadian currency and the order will go through to Canada. So these are just some of the things that you can do with WordPress. And I know it's a long-winded answer to a very short question, Frank, but it was a great question. Wasn't going to get into that tonight, but a great question to tell you that you can do business internationally. And the best way to do business internationally is, at least for the US and Canada, is to separate the US from Canada, and anybody else let the software do the exchange rate, and therefore then you would be shipping from Canada to that country.
Thank you for the good advice. Yeah, it is really, clear thinking. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I have a question, which is kind of related to the cross-border shipping, but it's not product because I'm selling services, so I'm a coach.
Got it.
So I just set up business accounts in one of the banks in here, and I do have a US account, but I haven't have clients from paying me from the US. So I'm wondering how this I'm wondering if you are going to touch on GST, HSC at some point tonight, or otherwise that would be my question, like how to deal with the tax.
So through WordPress, it's actually. Oh, sorry. Was your question about tax? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I was thinking about tax, but
Okay.
yeah, I would love to have some like website setup practices as well.
Okay. So here's where it gets, boy, you've asked the two questions. It's funny, I didn't think I'd get asked either question, but you've asked the two questions that were by far the same two questions and the most difficult with this early stage company I just set up. And these were the exact same two issues. So on the tax side, the beauty of WordPress is what it will do automatically for you is that if you check the box to charge your customer tax, it will look at the tax rate from where the person has ordered and automatically charge the tax to them. So they make it very, very easy. Now, this gets into a little bit bigger a question because especially if you're in the services business, right? So you're delivering the services from Canada. Technically, your argument is I'm exporting that services, let's say, to Chicago. Okay. So therefore, because I'm exporting it, do you need to collect US tax and pay US tax, and you're not registered in the United States as a company, right? So the argument would be as a small business, and again, don't take this as legal advice, and this is where I got to put my disclaimer in, is that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, I'm just an entrepreneur. But as an entrepreneur starting out, and if you're only going to have, probably a few sales in the United States, what I would do is I would stay as my Ontario corporation. I would count it as exporting the product. When I set up the US side of WordPress, what I would do is I would choose no tax, right? I wouldn't charge tax. And then what I would do is the person would pay, but because the person's in the US and I have the product set up in US funds for US people, they would look at the website, they would see the price of, let's say, $500 US, they would go in, pay 500 US. If that account is linked to your US dollar account, I think you mentioned you have a US dollar account. Okay, so if that account's linked to your US dollar account, that $500 would go directly into your US dollar account. You stay out of the exchange game. It's another valuable area of mentorship I'll provide for you is don't get into the exchange game. Keep US and US, keep Canadian and Canadian. So that $500 goes into your US account, end of story. If you really begin to start selling significant amounts in the US, then you do need to think about doing one of two things, either setting up as a US corporation in the US and charging tax appropriately and doing remission of taxes there, and or you have to declare that from an Ontario perspective to the US government to say, hey, I'm collecting money, I want to pay my taxes. And you can do that by working with there are accountants in Toronto, in Canada, that are actually US accountants. They do US returns. So you could work with one of those experts who are US accountants, but functioning in Canada, work with them, and they would tell you exactly what you need to do and what the thresholds are, what they consider to be the thresholds, that when you get to a certain level in revenue, where you should be doing certain things. And I have actually a few of them I've worked with in the past. So if you ever want names, although I think two of the three of them I think are retired now, I'm not sure. But I did work with about 3 different people, and there may be a few of them. One actually worked out of her home, so she was quite reasonable cost-wise as well. And she may still be functioning, and she would be the most reasonably cost-effective person as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on setting up a business or taxes or shipping? Okay, so it sounds like we'll go on to number 2. Hopefully, I don't know if we'll get to all 3 tonight, but we'll at least cover off the second one. And what I wanted to also share with you tonight are, again, whether you're looking to set up a business or whether you have one that's going right now, this is a great discussion regardless. And that discussion is the ingredients of what make for a very good business. And I think we did touch on some of this last time. I always touch on this, but I think it's the type of topic you can't touch on enough. So what are the ingredients of a good business? So the first thing you need to look at is whether you consider yourself to be a technology business, a service business, or a goods business. Those are the three basic type of businesses. And I will say this, I say that, fairly loosely, as if you've got to decide between those three. And it's actually quite a bit more complicated. And more so, it's much more important that you really focus some energy and time into making this decision. I'll give you a very good example without going, into too much detail. There was one company that I mentored for quite some length of time. And at a certain period of time, I had to divorce myself from the company because the principal of the company and I had very differing views. And I'm usually a pretty easy guy to get along with. But after trying to convince somebody for 2 or 3 years that they actually were a technology company, they still believed that they were a services company. So you get to a certain point where, you have to just allow that person to experience for themselves. If they prove you wrong, good for them, because then I learn as well. But more likely than not, I will probably prove them right. And I think technology will end up drowning that business. So you've got to decide what you are. So if you're providing a product like a services product, as an example, just earlier, we were talking about one individual on the call who does have what they consider to be a services business. But imagine for a moment that there was technology out there that was good enough to completely disrupt her business in such a way that because we weren't thinking down the road to think about, well, what is technology? What's AI? Or more importantly, AGI, and we can talk about that for about 170 hours. So we're not going to go into that tonight. But if AI or AGI comes along and can basically, through technology, do what you're doing, that's a threat. And remember, we talked about SWOT last week: threats, weaknesses, opportunities. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That would be on the threat side, is technology can be a threat to a good service. So you got to think about, if you choose to be in the goods business, right? And you sit there, or you choose to be, in your case, in the services business, the question you really have to ask yourself is, am I in the services business, or should I be in the technology business? Should I be a technology company that delivers technology that can provide the services that I currently do? Or are your services such that they work very much against technology, that it's a type of service that technology can never replace? So you really need to think through whether you're a technology company, a goods company, or a services company, and always, always be analyzing strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat, better known as SWOT, S-W-O-T, the SWOT analysis, okay? So that's something, again, give consideration to that. Think about what you are. And again, which leads me quite nicely to the next point of ingredients that make a good business is your business a disruptor? Now, if I remember back, and I may have the names and the people confused a little bit, I know we were talking at one point about someone who was involved in early childhood, and they were able to sort of create a different kind of teaching, a different kind of learning that very much supplemented what's being done in early childhood, but isn't necessarily being delivered. So in other words, this is a whole bunch of services outside of what the mainframe is doing that can be done on a specialty basis. And when you think about that, when I think about a company like that, that would be to some degree what I would call a bit of a disruptor. Because what it is that we have mainstream teaching something, but they're not teaching enough, they're not teaching everything, or they're not teaching it right. So somebody chooses to say, you know what, I'm going to be a disruptor, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently, maybe a little bit better, maybe an add-on to, but you become a bit of a disruptor to the industry, and people begin to flow to you because they get a better experience than they are getting in the mainstream. So you want to think about being a disruptor. It's the same thing I think we talked about this at some point, what Apple did to BlackBerry, what the digital world did to Kodak. So if you think about one of the greatest disruptors in our time was the development of digital media, and this whole idea, digital is basically digital is binary. If you break down digital, it's a bunch of zeros and ones. It's like 00111 000. So digital is a binary technology, and when it came along and it started to develop, I mean, it was a huge disruptor from the early 1990s all the way through. The internet was a huge disruptor. So when you think about a business, think about what could be a huge disruptor. Then, of course, the next thing to look at is something we call stickiness. Why should people continue to buy your technology or your goods or your services? What stickiness can you think of so that the customer can't leave you? So a good example of this is if you were in the, let's carry on with sort of the early childhood kind of teaching. Let's call it alternative early childhood teaching, so that it differentiates itself from early childhood teaching. If you were in the alternative early childhood teaching and you wanted to create stickiness, there's a bunch of ways you could do that. But one of the ways is that you could create a very nice software that stores a bunch of information for your client. And you could say to your client, we have this very unique dashboard where you can go in and do exercises, and you can do practicing, and you can do learning, and you can actually take, once you're finished your learning, you could take a little course and you could grade yourself and you get a little certificate, all those kinds of things. So you could build up something, a dashboard for them, where all of the information is stored in that dashboard. Now, can you imagine 6 months later, that person trying to leave you and go somewhere else? Because you have all that information, you have that dashboard, they're pretty much stuck to you. The other thing that you could do is you could create something like a subscription. You could say to somebody that, hey, I'm going to sell you all these courses. You're going to come, and every Friday we're going to sit down for 2 hours, and there's going to be a cost to that. But in addition to that, right, in addition to the individual counseling, I have collective counseling, and you can subscribe to that for $39 or $19 or $99 a month. And what that gives you is, over and above the individual counseling, I do collective counseling. I talk in general terms about my techniques and everything. And for $19 a month, you can subscribe to those webinars or that portfolio. And all of a sudden you create a cash flow of $19 or $29 or $39. And if you end up having 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 people, imagine having 100 people paying you $30 a month. All right, that's $3,000 you have coming in every month. And all you got to do is produce one program that's of interest to all 30 or 40 people, and produce that on a regular basis over and above your individual sessions. So subscription is another way you can go. The other thing is that you want to create something that is a need versus a want. So let me repeat that. Something that's a need versus a want. What's a need? A need is a requirement. As an example, I need to eat. I need to sleep, right? A want is, I'd like to have a boat. I like to go sailing, right? So you don't have to have a boat. That's a want, right? But a need is food. I have to have. So when you're creating your technology or your goods or your services, think about the importance. And some people make a lot of money on wants. They do. I mean, there's no question about it. But you're more likely to be successful if whatever you create is a need versus a want, because then it's something that people absolutely have. Then your only job is to try and be better than the next person, not to try and convince people that they should buy what you have. So need versus want is also a consideration, at least, for your selection in your company. Lastly, and perhaps I would say most importantly, is you have to have a great story. Not a good story, not a very good story, not a funny story, a great story. And everybody loves a story. Everybody loves to buy. When you look at programs like the Shark's Den or places like that, what do these shark investors, what are they buying? They are always buying a story. That's why it's a program. It's the Shark's Den. You go on, you watch an hour, you watch segments. They're 5-minute or 10-minute segments of each person. What are they doing? They're telling their story. Nobody goes on there and says, oh, here's my phone. Do you want 20% of the company for $1 million? No, they go on there and they do an entire skit. It's all about the story. Why did they develop the product? What makes it fun? What's the experience that you're going to have? People don't buy product because it's a good service or a technology. They buy things because it makes them feel good. That's why people buy things, because when they receive it, they get it. Even when you get a new phone, even though it's the same phone as last year, but you get a new phone, it just feels good. You've got the latest phone, it feels good. So what you have to do is you need to tell the story of why that person, by buying your technology, like downloading your app or buying your good or buying your service, how are they going to feel? Describe to them, how are they going to feel once they are taking your early childhood, your alternative early child, your advanced early childhood learning? How are they going to feel? What's the benefits of it? You can't, you got to tell me how I'm going to feel once I take your course, or once I subscribe to your collective course, or once I do both. Tell me how I'm going to feel. And that is how to tell a story. So I'm going to stop there in terms of just ingredients of a good business, and throw it open at this point also to any questions or comments that you guys may have. And if we have time, I'll try and squeeze in the last section, which has to do with executing and time management. And it's really important, but we could always save it for the next time if we don't have time. So firstly, any questions, comments on this segment on ingredients of a good business? Got to be some questions.
I have another one.
Okay.
How do you test your story?
How do you test your story?
Yeah.
Well,
It's
a great question. It's a really good question, and it's a very important thing to do. Again, it's hard when you talk about entrepreneurship. You could spend your lifetime on camera. You just can't cover it all. But it's a great question. How do you test? So one of the easiest things to do, although there is a bias in this, is you start out with your friends and family. I mean, it's obvious that, it's the easiest thing to do because they're there. One thing I caution you about testing a product is you have to understand, unfortunately, and this is actually, at one point you could sit there and say it's the downside, but at the same time it's the upside. Most people in general, are negative. Okay, we all know that. The average person, unfortunately, is negative. It takes a lot to be positive and happy all the time, right? It's a lot easier to be negative and sad. So most people are negative. So even in doing your testing, you don't want to place too much emphasis, and particularly friends or family. Actually, that's how you'll find out who your friends are. Particularly friends and family often will be negative, and they'll tell you, you know what? They'll tell you all the reasons why your product or service won't work, right? So sometimes you just have to put on your blinders and ignore them. But hopefully you can choose friends and or family that you really trust and really feel will give you an honest opinion. So I would start out with those people. And then what you could do, either through your business, it could be through your religious institution, it could be anywhere. You seek out people or other people to be testers. You create a control group, and maybe that's just finding 5 or 10 people. And maybe what you can even do is you can provide them. What we did, and sometimes I recommend, is we will actually give away our technology or our goods or our services to people if they'll volunteer to come in and test the product. So that's done all the time. You see Coke and Pepsi out there all the time with their comparison tests. So very often what will happen when you're wanting to introduce a product, one of the best ways, and I haven't talked about this, again, I do a whole segment on this called free, right? Giving things away for free. So one of the best ways to do it is to create your product and give it away for free. So as an example, if you're go back to the early childhood education, you have this alternative program. What you might say to 3 or 5 students that and say, look, right now I developed this new course. I will be charging for it, but for the first 7 students that sign up for the first 4 weeks or 8 weeks, it's being done completely free of charge, on the basis that you will do a survey at the end, you'll give me feedback, et cetera, right? So you offer something in exchange for information and a response back. That's the easiest way to your test, is free. Give something away in return for getting opinion back. Does that help at all?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this segment?
Martin?
Yep.
So you mentioned a company that cannot
tell service from technology. I'm just curious, how come? Like if you provide service, the service, you
Right.
provide technology, the technology. How come that people cannot tell?
It's a great question, Young, and sometimes it's just the personality of the individual. You can never change a person's personality. They're born with it, they die with it. The only thing you can change is behavior. And that's again a whole other segment that has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. Well, it does actually, but it's a whole other segment that I do, behavior versus personality. So sometimes people have it very fixed in their head that their particular service will never be replaced by technology. They're completely convinced that there's no technology, in this particular case, completely convinced that technology will not replace their service. And when I first delivered that message to them, I told them this 5 years ago, and I said that AI will replace their service, and it will. AI will replace their service. I told this 5 years ago, long before there was ChatGPT, long before AI was even being talked about by anybody. But I could see in the future, because I understood AI, I was a very early adopter to AI, I could understand how AI is definitely going to replace this. No matter how many times, Young, I would tell this individual it's going to, and even today, even now, with ChatGPT and all of the AI that's out there right now, the billions of dollars being spent, this individual still feels that their service will not be replaced by AI. And again, I don't want to get into it too deep, but I can tell you they're dead wrong. It almost has replaced them, but they're still hanging on to the thought that it won't. So the real question for the question you're asking is, how do you know? Well, you have to rely upon people like me and others who may have had 50 years worth of experience, who are people who are futurists that look into the future, look at technologies, understand what's coming in 10 and 20 years from now. You need to be able to go to those people and say, look, I currently provide a service. How, and then you have to ask yourself the question. You have to go out to the experts and say to them, how will technology potentially affect my service? If you're a good entrepreneur, you have good mentors. And if you're a good entrepreneur, you ask questions. And you're always asking questions. And the questions are always like, as an example, I'm holding an iPhone right now. And I'm going to ask you the question, what will this look like in 10 years from now? You know, if I told you that Apple, I think, is roughly 15 years old, isn't that mind-boggling? Like, doesn't it feel like they've been around forever? They're just 15, 16 years old. That's it. They didn't exist, 20 years ago. So the question would be is, what is this going to be in 10 years from now? Will it be a phone? Will it be a headset? Will it be glasses? Right? I had somebody come to me about 2 years ago that had this invention of creating glasses. And Young, this is very much up your alley. And what they wanted to do was they had this ability to make these glasses in such a way that they could add all kinds of technology to it. And I kept telling them it's already being done. Apple's doing it. Ray-Ban is doing it. The big players are all going to get into it. But it was just falling on people who just didn't want to listen. And I kept telling them that this is where the direction you need to move in. So what you need to do is you need to look at the good, you need to look at the service, you need to look at the technology, and you really need to look at the future using both mentors and what I call futurists, people who really understand where technology is going. And then you have to say to them, okay, what potentially would be the impact on your product? And then if you're a good entrepreneur, you will keep your eyes and your ears glued to the future of what the technology, and be very ready and very quick, which is actually on our next topic, which we may not have time for. But I was going to talk to you about execution and time management, and it leads me directly into it. It's something I call the 24-hour rule. I won't go into it right now, but you need to be able to react quickly and on a dime. I mean, you need to be able to react quickly. This is in business. One of the most important things is your ability to bounce around. I mean, you have to be able to be very flexible every minute, every second of the day. Things change. And when all of a sudden you realize that your product or service is going to very quickly through some new technology or service or good, somehow, some way, something's going to impact your business. You have to have the ability to quickly change and move in that direction to make sure you don't get drowned. And that's business. That both creates a threat for you, but it also creates an opportunity for somebody else. Your threat is somebody else's opportunity, right? So for somebody else, what's that other person doing? Well, today you may have a product, but I can tell you again, as I go back holding this iPhone, as I'm holding this in my hand, I can tell you that there's hundreds, thousands of people out there right now trying to figure out how to make this faster, cheaper, better. And maybe into something completely different. Maybe it'll be invisible. Maybe it'll be something that shines on your hand. Maybe it'll be a headset. Maybe it'll be something you wear around your waist. Who knows? But somebody out there is looking at the iPhone right now and saying, how can we make it cheaper, faster, better? So to them, there's an opportunity. To Apple, it's a threat, right? That's business. That describes business. Threats, opportunities, right? And then there's strengths and weaknesses of companies. And one of your strengths has to be your ability. You've heard the expression a business needs to be able to pivot, right? So part of being an entrepreneur is your ability to pivot. And if you're teaching, like I said, if you're teaching early childhood education and you're doing sort of an alternative course, what are those threats? You need to do that SWOT analysis and you need to do it regularly. What are the threats to your business? Right now, you're a threat to mainstream early childhood. But what's going to happen when all of a sudden other people start to come into alternative early childhood and they come in cheaper, faster, better? All of a sudden, you're teaching courses and somebody comes along with an online course for 10% of what you're charging, and they create the course and the person can get everything that you're doing. They can get it online and the person doesn't have to spend any time doing it. They just put it online, person gets the same benefit, and now all of a sudden they're providing an online course for the same price, right? And then the next person comes along and figures a way to make it cheaper, faster, better than the online course, right? So that's what business is. And your ability to pivot in business is perhaps one of the greatest assets that you can have. And if you get stuck, and that's why long ago, I think one of not the last session, but when we did the previous session, sometimes entrepreneurs get into this plateau, as I call it, where business starts to go really quickly, pick up. It starts going really nicely. And then all of a sudden it kind of plateaus for a while. And you're sitting there going, isn't this fantastic? I really don't have to work that hard. The money's coming in. I hope everything just stays exactly the way it is. And boom, somebody hits them from the side because they come in with something cheaper, faster, better. They stop working at it. They stop trying to do cheaper, faster, better themselves. And somebody comes in and knocks them right off the plateau onto the ground. So business is, it's like a sports game, right? It's like watching a hockey game or a football game or a baseball game. You see the momentum change, right? You get ahead. Look what happened. For any of you who watch baseball, look what happened in the World Series. You're in the World Series. You're in, I think it was Game 5, whatever. One team's ahead 5-0. And you sit there and say, oh, well, you don't have to worry about it anymore. I think the Yankees were ahead 5-0 in the I guess it was the 6th game or fifth game, I guess it was. I can't remember. But they were ahead 5-0 in the 5th game, I think it was. And so everybody figured, hey, we could probably go home now. Game over, All of a sudden, other team comes back. Los Angeles comes back very slowly. They score a couple of runs. Then all of a sudden they tie the game up and end up winning it by a run. That's because the New York Yankees went to sleep on that plateau thinking they had the game. But guess what? They didn't. That's business. Sports is a very close analogy to business. They didn't have the game. And they got knocked off. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't know you're a baseball fan too.
That was just, it's fun. The fun, when you're an entrepreneur, it's a lot of fun to watch sports, even if you don't like sports. It's a lot of fun to watch it because business and sports are very, very similar. And you can watch the momentum swing, and then you can watch it. You see it's two teams, right, that are fighting out there. And you see one team, is out there and they're doing really, really well, and they start to plateau. And then all of a sudden the other team says, no, hold on. We're not going to let you win this game. And they can, where you really see it quite heavily is in the sport of basketball. It's really funny to watch basketball. It doesn't seem to matter who's winning or losing for the first 3 quarters of the game. It always boils down to like almost every game boils down to the last 2 minutes. And the last 2 minutes, you can just see one team has the momentum, they go ahead, then the other one goes ahead, then the other one. And it's just exactly like business. There's always somebody trying to win the game. And remember, when you're in business, you're in a game and you're there to win the game. And if you stop trying, or you sit on the bench, or you sit back and think you've got the game won, that's when you lose the race. There's another story I could tell, but I'll stop there. So are there any other questions or comments that anyone would like to make in regards to either setting up a business or ingredients that make a good business?
Okay, Martin, sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of the ingredients to create something that is a need over the want.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, so what may be those strategies to create a need? Because the needs, it really depends on the customers. Each one could be in a different situation. You create that needs based on how you originally pick up the product or the service that can tailor to someone's needs, or by later on create some big story that can influence people's needs or wants. So what's your approach over here?
I think, to some degree, I think you've almost answered your own question, and very eloquently, I might add. You see, when you have a product, a service, a technology, often when you start out in business, it is a want. It's not a need. Because it hasn't been identified yet as a need. It's been identified as a want. It's been identified as a luxury. It's something that you don't have to need, but you can want. But if you develop the story, and it's a really great story of how much this helped an individual, you can convert the thinking of people from a want to a need. And that's if you can create a great story. So if the story is good enough that somebody says, hey, you know what? We thought this was just a want, but now I realize, no, this isn't a want anymore. We absolutely need to have this. And where you see this, it's kind of funny. I'm just thinking on the news today, because these things come to my mind sometimes, is I'm thinking about, I think everyone knows Taylor Swift is coming to Toronto. I guess it's tomorrow, the next day. And I laughed today because they set up the Rogers Center, I guess it was. I think that's where she's performing. And they set up like a merchandise day, right? So one would argue that getting a Taylor Swift sweater or hat or whatever it might be, one would argue very much that that's a want. It's not a need. But if you think about this euphoria that's been created about this individual and her music and her show, and how she's been made to make, literally, she's a goddess at this point, the way that she's been marketed, to a lot of people, the story, which is her, all the hype around her, the supply demand of tickets, how they've limited the number of shows, how they sell out right away. You can't get, you have to line up, you have to know somebody, you have to go in lotteries to get tickets. All of a sudden, something that should completely be a want, right? Completely be a want, has become what? It's become a need. To a young lady who's maybe 16 years old, if she doesn't get in to get that piece of merchandise today, she may end up in the psych ward. She may end up sick. She may end up with a mental breakdown. I mean, I mean that sincerely. That's how much hype there's been to make this into a need. So that's because of what? It's because, well, yes, there's a lot of talent there. There's no question about that. But it's not just the talent that made her. It's all of the hype and all of the marketing that's been put around her, which is what everybody does, whether it's in sports or entertainment. So that's a really good example where a great story has converted something that should be a want, for some people at least, a lot of people, into an absolute need. It's not a question that I want that T-shirt. They need to have that T-shirt. They're going to have a physical breakdown. Does that help you at all?
Yeah, that's a great example. Actually, you covered that very well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So here's where we're at. It's 8:37. I guess we've been at this an hour. I think this was advertised a little bit as an hour. I have one segment which would take about probably 10, 15 minutes on execution and time management. So we have a choice. We can either take this segment, we can call it a night now. I can answer any last minute questions anybody has. I can take this segment and make it the opening segment of our next get together, which I think is in 3 or 4 months from now. Young can help us with the date. Or I'm happy to deliver it now. What would the group prefer?
Please type in a chat box. Let's have a vote.
Yeah, we'd love to have more and more. Okay. Yeah, but yeah.
So I see in the chat box, somebody says SWOT stands for strength, weakness, opportunity, and the T stands for threat.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't copy the whole thing. That's
right.
Yeah. So Martin, why don't you just go ahead?
Okay.
Tell us something about time management. I definitely need that. Even I'm not an entrepreneur.
Okay. Well, this is actually perhaps I would say my most fun topic, and I'll explain to you why momentarily. I'm going to talk a combination of execution and time management because they're somewhat related. I'll start off with execution. I'll move to time management, and I'll just tell you ahead of time, the reason I love time management so much is that when I was very young in my business, I had the opportunity of doing the recordings of all of the time management experts from around the world. Anybody who did seminars or teaching of time management pretty much did their audio cassettes in those days. They did all their audio through me. So I had them all in my office, in my studio on a very consistent basis. And because I was very interested in the topic, I was able to learn a lot. So I was able to take from the 10 top experts to sort of summarize and create my own methodology of time management, which has been time tested. And I think to this day, and once you hear, I think it's just an excellent way of managing your time. And we'll get into that momentarily. But the first topic I want to talk about is execution. And I think I mentioned again on the last time we were together, a buddy of mine wrote a book called Execute or Be Executed, which means it's very, very important to execute on whatever you're doing. So this week, and I always, when I'm listening to things, I always think of this group and other groups that I talk about entrepreneurship to. This week, I had a very, very interesting suggestion made to me about a 24-hour rule. And typically, a 24-hour rule to me means something very different. My 24-hour rule, just so you know, is that the minute I sort of don't see eye to eye with somebody, I don't necessarily agree with them, typically what I'll try to do is I'll say to them, look, we don't agree right now. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Let's invoke the 24-hour rule. And that means for the next 24 hours, we're not going to talk about it. We're going to think about it. And then we'll reconvene in, next day or a day after. Let's reconvene when we had a chance to really digest through this and have a more meaningful discussion when we both had a chance to think about it. That's my 24-hour rule. But this new 24-hour rule, which has nothing to do with the other 24-hour rule, has to do with execution. So there's an individual, it's not important who it is, but there's an individual out there, and the way he runs his company is his 24-hour rule is that the minute you come up with an idea, any idea, a new idea where you're thinking of a new product, a new service, a new technology, you must act on it immediately. The longest is 24 hours. But this individual believes you need to act on it right away. So in other words, when somebody in the office, in his office at 4 o'clock on a Thursday says, hey, I've got this great idea, and he hears it, he calls the whole company together and they start acting on it that second, that very minute. His claim to fame is that he considers his entire success of his company to be that they're not necessarily better, but they're faster. They're faster at everything they do because they act right away, no matter what it is. And his whole thinking is, I would rather act on an idea and make 3 mistakes and fix them then wait for the weeks and weeks of committee meetings and regulatory meetings and government meetings and more meetings and then more discussion and strategic plans. And then a year later, when you finally go through all of these meetings and everything else, you decide to launch the product. And yeah, it might be perfect by then, but the other companies launched it a year earlier because they simply acted on it faster. So one of the things I want to leave with you just for thinking about tonight is this whole concept of acting faster than your competition. Acting faster, faster specifically defined as no longer than 24 hours, and not being afraid to act so fast that you make mistakes, because it's much easier to correct the mistakes. And we, in the old days, we used to call this trial by error. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, but trial by error, which means you try something, you keep going at it, you know it's kind of broken, but you keep fixing it until you get it right. And so you go through this whole trial and error, and you can do things a lot faster if you just start at them, throw it at the wall, see if it sticks, fix it, manipulate it, do what you need to do, and just keep at it until all of a sudden you say, hey, we've got it, and get that thing out in a day or 2 days or 3 days, as opposed to having meeting after meeting after meeting. And it takes sometimes days, weeks, months, years to get that product out, because you just, or you schedule it for 3 weeks. Well, yeah, it's a great idea, John. Let's have a meeting. And then everyone looks at their calendar. Yeah, let's have a meeting on this. And they realize, oh, wait a minute. The first date that we can all get together is in June, and it's November, right? And meanwhile, 6 months goes by and the whole idea gets lost, and somebody else acts on it faster. So this concept of fast and working on things right away. Can you imagine if tomorrow morning you wake up and you have an idea about your company, and you sit there and say, as an example, the earlier question was, how do I sell into the US? I haven't had any sales yet. Okay. Well, imagine right now you said that. Now I would challenge you to say is, how are you going to get your first sale in the US tomorrow? I don't want a sale in a week. I don't want you to think about it. I want you to go and get your first sale in the US. Get on the phone, do whatever you need to do, go to your website, set it up so it sets you up. So it forces a whole bunch of things. It forces you to go on your website. It forces you to set up US currency, forces you to say that your product is, if it's in US currency, it's only available to US people. It forces you to set up your US dollar account, which you already have. It forces you then to get on the phone and start making some phone calls and sit there and say, or get your friend or your family, get on the phone and start calling people. Let's get our first order by the end of the day. And all of a sudden you get your first order in, and you realize, oh my God, I just realized it looks like the currency is wrong. Okay, so you made a mistake. Then you go fix the currency. Or the software, you forgot to check the box that said no shipping because it's a technology product, and it's technology, yet it charged them shipping. So you fix the shipping. So the whole concept of just jumping in the water, okay, and figuring out how to swim and doing things faster than anybody else. I'm not suggesting you do it to a completely crazy point, but I am suggesting that you probably consider somewhere between doing things a lot faster than you are right now and bordering on doing things so ridiculously fast that you're bound to fail. So somewhere in between there is the right answer. So let me move on from there. It was just a really interesting concept, which I love, by the way, and something I'm going to engage with a couple of companies I'm working with. So let me go on a little bit now to talk about time management. I say probably my favorite topic of all topics other than entrepreneurship, which is all connected, to tell you this. And let me start out by saying that time manages, you cannot manage time. Time manages itself perfectly well. There's 24 hours in the day. There's 60 minutes in the hour. There's 60 seconds in the minute. We can't control that. The only thing that we can control is ourselves in respect to time. So we can control ourselves in respect to time. We can't control time. So let's talk a little bit about how we control ourselves in time. And this will be my fun part of the night. So fairly recently, when I say recently, I think it was iOS 18.0.1, something like that. The last release, just released, I think a couple of weeks ago from Apple. Apple did something that probably only a person like me, I might be the only person in the world, noticed, right? But what they actually did For the first time in their 15 years, they actually linked what they call their reminders list. And just for clarification of terminology, their reminders list is the same as somebody else's to-do list or task list. So instead of talking about tasks, to-do lists, or reminders, I'm just going to call it reminders for the purposes of tonight's presentation. So when I talk about reminders, it's the same as tasks, it's the same as to-do, okay? What Apple did for the first time ever, they linked the reminders list to the calendar app. So that when you go in the reminders app is still there, but when you go into the calendars app, you can now access the reminders app. So all your reminders now can be accessed in your calendar. Now you might ask, Martin, why is that important? Okay, so here's lesson 1 of time management. I'm going to guess when I say that all of you on this call tonight have a calendar and a separate reminders list. Is there anybody on this call tonight that doesn't? So everybody has a calendar and everybody has kind of this separate reminders list or to-do list, right? So the calendar items are all your scheduled items, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, I'm going to have lunch with so-and-so. I have to get a report done at 10 o'clock. All of your appointments with your doctors, your appointments with your business associates, your appointments to take your kids to school, it's all in your calendar. Then you got your to-do list, right? Which is, take out the garbage, what's on your to-do list? Make sure you call the plumber, all those things on your to-do list. But usually it's a separate list. And what usually happens with that list is every day it moves to the next day. And almost all of it, most of it, will move to the next day. And it keeps moving and moving and moving and moving. And for argument's sake, very rarely does it get done. And you keep prioritizing it. You move one up to the bottom, one up to the top, but you have this ongoing list. And you're already in the habit of, I'm going to do everything in my calendar because it's associated with a time, right? I have a doctor's appointment at 10. The kids need to be picked up at 11. I have a business lunch at 12. But all the to-do list stuff, take out the garbage, go get the groceries, whatever, all of that's on a list, which because your calendar is full, that list is going to be separated every day. So back 50 years ago, almost 50 years, 49 years ago, first time I met Harold Taylor, who's one of my gurus, one of my mentors in time management, his whole concept back then, long before computers, what they used to use back then was called a quo vadis. Think of it as the printed version of the calendar that we use on a computer today, okay? And what quo vadis did was they effectively forced you to put your reminders or to-do list, to combine it with your calendar. And the whole concept was that you only have 24 hours a day, 8 of them you're sleeping, 4 of them you have to eat, shower, whatever else you do. So it leaves you with about 12 hours. If those 12 hours are basically scheduled in your calendar, how are you ever going to fit your reminders list? You'll never get it done. It's just going to keep rotating every day. So quo vadis, what they did was they sort of forced the issue of combining your reminders list into your calendar. So you had one list and treating your to-do list as appointments. In other words, if on your to-do list was to go and take out the garbage or was to go and get the groceries, which was going to take an hour, you actually had to take that to-do item or that reminders item, and you actually had to schedule it in and treat it just like it was an appointment. Does that make sense to everybody so far, what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, so this big, this big movement of putting your task reminders into your calendar, I almost fell off my chair when all of a sudden Apple is, after 15 years, 2 weeks ago, released, and somebody there figured out what somebody 50 years ago had figured out was they should be combined together. So the first aspect of getting yourself organized, okay, is to, and by the way, Google and some of the others have been providing tasks within their calendar. They just haven't done it very effectively or very well. There's not a product out there, and I've used them all. There's one called Calendar. Google has their own, but managing tasks within their particular calendar, I found a bit difficult. This is the first time, the first electronic calendar that I've seen. The standard, it's completely free. The standard calendar that Apple has, where the way in which they've combined reminders. I use the list view in Calendar. So it's the list view in Calendars where you can see both the month and you can see all your tasks and appointments underneath it, all combined into one. And then what you can do is you can actually schedule your tasks along with your appointments, and therefore your tasks and your appointments all get done. Obviously, if you have to move them because something happens, at least you know where your available time slots are. At least when you move it, it's into a time slot that's real and it's available for you to do at a later point. So the first thing is getting your tasks combined with your calendar. Right now, if you happen to use Apple, it's a very good platform to use Calendar, use the list view, and combine your reminders right in there. And when you go to create a calendar event, on the top, it says you can choose between whether it's a calendar event or whether it is a reminders event. And it gives you a different kind of fill-in to create the event, but they end up showing up in the same place. So now at least we have all our tasks and our calendar items combined together. We're not cheating and fooling ourselves to pretend like, here's my calendar that's completely full, yet I'm going to get all this to-do list or all this reminders done when you know you have absolutely no time to do it. So put them together, treat your tasks like they're appointments, and that's the first step to helping you in terms of managing your time. Now, in terms of actually getting yourself organized, and this will be kind of the last part of this segment for tonight. When you have, you might say, oh, Martin, that's great. You know, I put my tasks in there, everything else, but here's my problem. I'm a mess. If you looked at my desk, I got stuff piled up like 3 feet tall. I got stuff on my computer all over the place. I have reminders that don't have dates and time. I'm a mess. I need help, right? So I often get that kind of thing. Oh, this is really nice. So if you're organized, you have this nice little list and you have your calendar, sure, we put them together, makes sense. Now I'm managing my time effectively. I get that. But the problem is I'm a mess. So how do you get yourself out of being a mess? So listen carefully, because this is a real effective way. What you do is wherever the mess is, whether it's on your desk or in your computer, okay, the first thing you do is you schedule in your calendar combined with your reminders, so we know we have the time. So we schedule, let's say, for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for 1 hour, from 10 to 11. It's going to be called cleaning out my mess or cleaning up my mess. So now I have a scheduled time. From 10 to 11, I'm going to clean up my mess. And let's say the mess is on your desk. It's just a bunch of bills or paperwork, or I guess bills now are all electronic, but it's just a bunch of paperwork on your desk. It's leases you sign, whatever it might be. You have a bunch of paperwork on your, could be course outlines, classes you're going to teach. You just have a bunch of paper on your desk. So again, you can use the same philosophy. Is if your papers are all on your computer, they're all electronic, it's the same thing. But let's just say, from a description, right now we have a bunch of papers on our desk, we need to sort it out. Okay, so here's the simple solution to get through that mess, because what you do every day right now is, I know what you do. You go, you look at that mess, and you start to look through the mess, right? You're going through the mess, and you're trying to pull out the ones, oh yeah, that's got to be today, and oh, wait a minute. So you're going through that mess every single day, every single hour. You're spending more time going through the mess than doing the mess, right? So you're wasting a lot of time. So here's what to do. You put the mess on top of your desk, and you commit to doing the following. You schedule it from 10 to 11 or 2 to 3, or maybe a whole bunch of 1 hour segments, depending on how big your mess is. You take the top item, the first item, not the most important. You don't go through the pile. You take the first item that's there, and you ask yourself 4 questions. And you're going to do this with each item. Eventually, it will become a habit, and you'll just do this automatically. The questions are as follows. When you pick the first thing up, do it, which means that if it is something very quick, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, that type of thing, something under 2 minutes that you can do right away, signing a check or signing a lease or maybe just putting that presentation inside a folder, whatever it might be. If it can be done quickly in a minute or two, very short period of time, just do it. Get it, put it out of the way. Let's say you go on to the second thing and you look at it and go, oh my God, I've got to do a whole course outline here. That's going to take me like 3 hours to do. Well, you can't do it quickly. So the first question you need to ask yourself, this is step 2, is can you delegate it? Can somebody else do it? Who can I give this to? So when you look at this thing, you can't do it. It's going to take too long. Can I delegate it? Who can I delegate it to? And if you can hand it off to somebody else, you just saved yourself 3 hours. So that's the question number 2. Question 3 is, if you can't do it, you can't If you can't do it, you can't delegate it. Step 3 is schedule it. Okay. And schedule it means this is going to take me 3 hours. Now you look at your calendar that's now combined with your reminders list, so we're not fooling ourselves. And you sit there and say, okay, well, I have probably a week to do this. I need 3 hours. You could either look at a block of time where you have 3 hours, or you could more effectively maybe say, I'll spend an hour tomorrow, an hour on Monday, and maybe an hour Tuesday afternoon. You schedule those 3 time slots to complete that schedule, put it aside. It's now scheduled, ready to go. And so that's what you do with each item. Do it, delegate it, schedule it. Now you're all wondering, what's the 4th thing? Does anybody want to guess that you got something in your hand? If you can't do it, you can't delegate it, and you can't schedule it, what's the 4th thing? Anybody want to guess? Sorry?
Forget about it.
Correct. Brilliant. Not a lot of, by the way, nobody gets that answer. I think there's one other person in the history of doing this has got it. You got it. That's the answer. Throw it out. Forget about it.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, it's very astute, very astute. Nobody gets that. They're all wondering, what's the 4th thing? What else? Throw it out. And the reason you throw it out,
although I never can do it.
Yeah, I know. But you have to get yourself into these good habits. And these good habits are, you gotta be honest with yourself. You can't lie to yourself. You gotta be honest with yourself. If you can't do it, you can't delegate it, you can't schedule it, you know it's never getting done. Throw it out, because it can't be that important. And if it is that important, you will find a way to either delegate it or schedule it. And if it's not important enough to delegate or schedule, throw it out, because it's just going to sit on the desk. And I guarantee you, a year later from now, you'll go back and it's still going to be sitting on your desk. So do it, delegate it, schedule it, throw it out. Go through your pile meticulously, one by one. If you only get halfway through that pile, say, wow, you're going to feel like you just lost 10 pounds, right? Because all of a sudden it's going to, wow, that was amazing. That's fantastic. So then at that point, your time's up. It's 11 o'clock. Say, okay, I'll just put this aside for now. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, I got to schedule the rest of the pile. This worked really well. So then you go back to your calendar and you schedule, okay, I need another hour to clear up the mess, right? So you look for another available hour, clear up the mess, put it aside, don't even look at it. Then when you get to the next, whether it's another couple of days or next day or whatever, clear up the mess comes up, you pull the pile back, go through it one by one, do it, delegate it, schedule it, throw it out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, completes our, I could talk on time management, honestly. It's sort of segmented into 8 courses, and they're all about 2 hours long. But this is the essence of what you need to do to get organized, is those 2 things. If the only 2 nuggets you walk away with tonight, nuggets being an effective tool, are getting your calendar and your reminders list together, and now I'm even giving you the technology through Apple to do it. If you can just do those 2 things and combine those 2 things, and you can use Google if you don't have Apple, combine your calendar and your tasks so you're not fooling yourselves, and then go through your mess, do it, delegate it, schedule it, and throw it out. Just do those 2 things. It will probably increase your productivity, your effectiveness, and your ability to manage things probably on a scale of like 80 to 90%. It did for me. It continues to do for me. By the way, it's like going on a diet. I have to remind my own self sometimes. I slip. I do the same thing. Sometimes I got stuff on my desk, and it's like I start to go through it, and I'm picking out. Oh, wait a minute! I got to go through this. I got to see what's important for today. And I catch myself, and I go, wait a minute. What am I doing? I'm making the same mistake that I'm telling everybody else to fix. So you do get sometimes thrown off a bit, but as long as it's really important. So if I were you from tonight, other than the first two we talked about, for this segment, I would write down either on your computer electronically or with a pen and paper, write down calendar reminders together, right? Calendar and reminders together. That's one thing. And then write down, do it, delegate it, schedule it, throw it out. And that's the second pattern. Those two things, put them right in front of you. Maybe it's the banner on your computer, however you want to do it, as a constant reminder. And those two things will make you probably more effective than, I'm going to say, 90% of people in business today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Frank. If there's any other questions or comments, I'm happy to entertain them, and then we'll call it a night. Frank, you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought for a moment I thought everybody was gone.
No. Yeah, thank you. We should organize a workshop on time management. That's what when the app is fully out.
All right.
Yep.
So were there any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Martin.
Hi.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful workshop.
Thank you.
Really, I enjoy it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate the comment.
Yep. Thank you. Really like it.
My complete pleasure.
And you have a book on execute it or be executed?
It's not my book. It's actually a book that was written many years ago. The author of it is a guy by the name of Sam Geist, Geist. It's an old book. It's, I'm guessing, got to be 20, 30 years ago. But I'm sure it's still probably effective today. But it was called Execute or Be Executed. Sam Geist actually has written or had written about, I'm guessing when I say this, but I think he's written somewhere between 5 and 10 books. So you can look at what he's written and decide if any of that's important to you. There's so many, honestly, there's so many authors out there. It's just, I know Sam. I haven't spoken to him in years, quite frankly, but I did know him quite well back then. We would sit and have a lot of these discussions, and I feel quite confident that a lot of our discussions ended up in his book or books. Actually, one of the very cute ones, you'll really laugh at this one. He published one book. The front of the book was a mirror. Now, it wasn't an actual mirror, but when you picked up the book, you could actually see yourself, and that's what it was. And the title of the book was, "Would You Work for Someone Like You?" So it was a very, very cute book. When you picked it up, would you work for someone like you? And then, of course, you were looking at yourself, right? So, and that was also a pretty good book. But he's got some really good stuff in there. I would say this. I mean, it's probably a bit dated at this point because when he wrote a lot of these books, quite frankly, I don't even think the internet was out. But it's interesting. A lot of the information is still very much just like calendar and tasks and putting them together was something Quo Vadis did 45, 50 years ago. And Apple thinks they're being brilliant 50 years later. And reality is they're just doing something that was founded, 50 years ago that they just forgot about or never thought about. So
another thing I want to mention, Martin, is that I founded a Toastmaster club 2 years ago, and it's a bilingual club. So I constant, not only do I take notes on the idea you share, I also took note of your speech structure, like when you use the introduction, what transition you use, etc. You're a great speaker. I hear no filler words. It's amazing.
Well, I got to tell you why this you just sent a complete thrill up my body, a chill up my body, and I'll tell you why. I'll share with you, since there's just a few of us left on the call, I'll share with you a very, very interesting, funny story. And it's as an entrepreneur, speaking to other entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, you guys will really appreciate this story. So when I first started my business, I was 19 years old. And think about it, I was a young kid. I knew nothing at the time. I had been in first year university. I left at the end of first year university. I wanted to start a business. And my father at that time was a successful businessman. And he belonged to, I guess it was the Chamber of Commerce at the time. And they had a luncheon. And at each luncheon, they would have a different speaker, just like Toastmasters, exactly the same thing. So you're going to really appreciate this story. So my father said to me at 19 years old, I had been in business, I think about 2 months. He said, I spoke to my group and they're inviting you to come and speak about your company at our next luncheon. And they get about 100 people to their luncheon. And I said, oh, that would be great. I'd be happy to do that. I'm 19. I'm probably as ignorant at that time about business and life and everything else that there possibly could be. So I figured I'm just going to go and talk in front of this group. I don't have to prepare anything. I'm just, because it should be easy enough. I'll just get up in front of these 100 people, tell them about my company, right? Well, I got to tell you that I did my single worst presentation. Maybe it was the worst presentation of anybody that's ever been in front of a microphone. It was that bad. It was so bad that my father, who was so proud of me, was embarrassed. He never said anything, but I could see in his face he was totally embarrassed because, of course, he had recommended I speak at the meeting. And that was a very, very rude awakening to a lesson that whenever you're going to talk in front of an audience, you better be very well rehearsed and very well prepared. So, but to tell you the funny part of the story was at the end of the luncheon, I did my presentation. They were very polite in giving me some applause. I knew that they were all just, I could see in their faces, they were all looking like, who arranged this? How did they have this kid up there who can't talk and was, it was just so discombobulated. It was terrible, right? So I could just see it in their faces. So I've got my head, hanging down. I'm walking out. I see my father's face. He's embarrassed. And we're walking out. The only person that came up to me, and he came up to me, and the first thing he said to me, he said, Martin, that was a great presentation. And I lifted my head up, and finally I thought, really? Because in my head, I thought it was the worst in the world. And I thought, maybe it wasn't so bad. And you know what the next thing he said to me? He said, hey, by the way, it was a great presentation, but I know you could probably do a little bit better. By the way, I happen to be a member of Toastmasters and I want to invite you. There you go. So to tell you how full circle your comment is tonight, that's how bad it was in the very beginning that someone from Toastmasters came up to me to ask me to come and talk at their presentation because my presentation was so horrible. It was, it really was. So yeah, it's interesting. And I'm so glad that you're engaged with the group. It's a wonderful, wonderful learning experience. It's a great place to go, firstly, and meet people, and it's a great place to become effective at presentations as well. So keep going there. Go to the Toastmasters. Go to the boards of trade. Go to all of these. Go to the young entrepreneurs. Young leaders. There's all kinds of these groups out there, and I would really encourage you as entrepreneurs. And again, there's just so much over these periods of time to tell you. Get involved in these organizations, these associations, the chambers of commerce, the young leaders, any group that you can. It's so easy today just to go do a search on the internet and look up young entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneur groups, and you'll get a list of 1,000 of them, and you'll know which ones are the right ones because you'll recognize them. Things like Toastmasters, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. You'll get to see these groups, or the Board of Trade is another one. And honestly, go to these things, go to these events, because not only does it help you in terms of communications and communicating with other people, this is how you set your networks up. A little secret that I can share with you, and again, I'm sorry to keep you because it's not my intention, but another little secret is one of my best sources of business growth, believe it or not, was actually my competition. My competition was probably my singular best source of growth that I had in my well, now I was out of the business, but in my 37 years of officially in my business, the competition was probably where I got most of my business. And I'll tell you what happened when I first, we had our own industry association. It was only about 110 people, but we were all competitors, and we met once a year in January. The first time I went, I was like, I was being very protective because I thought I knew more than anybody else. But when I went there, I realized a couple of things. Number one, there's a lot of people there who knew a lot more than me, and I could learn. And number two, everybody there, they were human beings, and they were willing to share. And everybody just wanted to make everybody else better, even though we were competitors. And the funny part of it is, we all realized there's enough room out there. There's enough space. We can't just have one, you can't just have one gas station. You have to have hundreds of gas stations, right? So if the 110 of us could make each other better, then at least we would be the top 110. So we all began to realize that. And I will tell you, the friendships, the sharing, even to the point where I can remember many times, where we were completely filled up to capacity with being able to service our clients. And I'd get a phone call, from someone in Chicago saying they're having a meeting in LA, and could we do their meeting in December? And in the old days, I would have tried to figure out, how could I find people? Where could I find people? As an entrepreneur typically would. But as I begin to grow, or as I began to grow within my business and mature in my business, I realized, this is foolish. I'm going to try and put this together. We'll probably end up having a miserable failure. I'm going to get a bad reputation. This makes no sense at all. All I did is I hung up the phone and I said, let me get back to you. I think we can't do this properly for you. I don't want to do this in a bad way, but I think I know somebody who could. I would phone up my competitor in LA and I'd say, hey, John, or whatever it might be, I've got this client. He's a longstanding client of mine, but I just can't service them in LA. Do you think you could do me a favor and service them? The favor I'd ask you is once you've done their meeting, I would really appreciate if you could return the customer back to me. You guys like to keep this customer, but on the other hand, if the customer really wants you, that's fine too. And every single time I did this, the company that handled it did an amazing job because I only picked the best people. And every single time I did it, the client would come back to me and say, this is an amazing company, but we worked with this company and that company couldn't say enough nice things about you guys. And they were so good. They were insistent that we go back to you. And I can see you're both, so we're coming back to you. I didn't lose one client. And they came back to me. In fact, I ended up saving the client because I looked good because I gave them somebody good. And then what started to happen is the phone would ring from LA to say, hey, we've got this meeting up in Toronto or in New York. We can't do it. Would you do it for us? And we started to develop this network. And then it went further than that. It went even further to the point where we got together as a group and said, it's crazy. We're shipping equipment. To your point earlier, Frank, about shipping stuff cross-border. We're shipping equipment across the country, across the border. And this is big, heavy equipment. We're shipping across the border. Why don't we get together and we can all agree that we'll put a label on each piece of equipment, whether it was a duplicator, whether it was cassettes, whether it was boxes. We decided, and we said, why don't we set up a pricing strategy? And today they might call it collusion, but back then, why don't we set up a pricing strategy for what we call cross-rental between us? So anytime you go to a city, instead of you having to take your equipment there, we have local companies there and they have extra equipment, we would all agree that we would rent it at $150 per duplicator per day. And that would be the set price for everybody. So we wouldn't have to negotiate anything. Any company that opts into this could go to any city, not travel without any equipment, and just rent it in good shape because we know the companies. We just rent it from each other. So the equipment could stay still. We would just move around. As an industry, we ended up saving thousands of dollars in transportation, thousands. So we all work together. So I would encourage you, this is almost a whole separate topic, is get involved with associations, get involved with all of these organizations that are basically not only networking organizations, but also organizations with your own field. So as an example, if you are involved in early childhood education, there are last I remember, because I used to work with all the associations in early childhood. They were all clients of mine. So last I remember, there were like dozens of early childhood organizations. So what I would do is attend those conferences. If you're teaching an alternative to early childhood education, you start going to those conferences, make the contacts there, find out who the competition is, maybe exhibit there, find out who's running the organization, let them know who you are, let them know what you have, start to build those networks. And that's what you can do through an association. So go to the ones that are entrepreneurial, as well as going to the one that are professional, in other words, within your trade. Go to both types and go on a regular basis. And I'm building another business right now in the staffing industry where that business has almost entirely been built on my suggestions of going to the industry association meetings. They have almost built their entire business just based on that. So it's one of the other sort of things that, like I like to call it my secret sauce. That's part of my secret sauce, is going to these events. So I'm sharing, that's a huge nugget, which I'm sharing with you tonight. On that note, I'm going to zip it. Any other questions, comments, concerns, any comments anyone wants to make?
I want to make one last comment. Martin, you gave me a very good idea, and I'm going to act on it within 24 hours. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's a delight to be here, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share with you, because this is stuff I don't want to take with me. I want to leave it for other people. And that's, if there's ever a legacy that anyone wants to leave, it's the legacy of giving. So I'm very, very happy to have people who are willing to receive. That being said, I think, I'm not sure, Frank, I know he's still there. Okay. So that being said, Frank, I'll turn it over to you to close it off. And I'm not sure when the next date is, but we will see you on the next date. So over to you, Frank.
For inquiries, please contact info@eawlc.org or visit our website at www.eawlc.org.